Hello, and welcome to Jayme's Journal. I'm Jayme, and today we're going to be talking about 3 things that I've learned so far on my journey to becoming a published author. So this weekend, I attended the SMIAH Writers Conference. It was a mini conference that they put on for free this year, which is fantastic. And they actually are continuing that. So if you're interested in attending a writers conference and you've never done that before, you still have time to sign up and you'll have access to all of those classes until I believe October 30th. So go on the Facebook page. It's SMIAH Writers Conference and look for the details there. And what happened is they decided to do this mini conference this year where they put on, I think, 30 different small workshops where they're short workshops, like 17 to 30-ish minutes long, about different topics that you can learn about. And I spent around 6 hours on Saturday doing these short workshops and learning new things about plotting and scene and character development and using poisons and using firearms and weapons in your story and just a whole bunch of different really cool things that they had short lessons about that you can learn something new. And that brings me to the first thing that I wanted to talk to you about today. And that is, you never stop learning. Whether you're reading books about writing and how to perfect your craft, or you're reading books in your genre to make sure that you're staying up to date and you're current on the topics and you're not getting too close to what somebody else is already writing, and reading other genres to see if you can bring in other elements into your story and help make your story even better. You're always learning through books and conferences like the Storymakers Conference and the short SMIAH conference that I just told you about, and research. I mean, you spend a lot of time as an author researching, whether that's researching to make your craft better or researching for things in your story. Because when you're writing your story, typically when you're a new writer, and I can vouch for this because I am a very new writer, you write what you know. And that means places that you know, things that you know, people that you know, you put those things in your story typically. But if you want to keep writing and you want to have, say, a series, then you're going to want to bring in some other elements into your story. And you're going to want to know about those elements, especially for something like urban fantasy, because like we talked about before, urban fantasy talks about places that we all know and see in everyday life. And because I live in Albuquerque, New Mexico, I write about that, and that's fantastic. But in my second book, I'm going to want to put my characters in someplace new. And in order to do that, that means I'm going to have to do some research. I'm going to have to make sure that I know that place, I know what it looks like, and I'm able to write about it from a perspective that is not going to make me look like an absolute outsider. Because when your audience reads your book, they're going to know you're an outsider. They're going to say, there is no place like that here. Or, oh yeah, I can totally see that. That is that place over there on that street. And I've seen that place before. Or I know what they're talking about because I live here. And you wouldn't know that they didn't live there because they did their research. You're going to want to know how people speak in that place, how they dress in that place, because even though it might be in the same country, you still see cultural differences, in different cities and different towns across the country. You're going to see cultural differences. You're going to see different accents. You're going to see that they say certain things a different way. Something as easy as Coke versus pop versus soda pop and hoagie or sub, and just words like that, common everyday things that maybe somebody would say differently than what you say in your own hometown. And you need to do that correctly. That means you have to research, and you're going to spend a lot of time doing that. The second important thing that I learned, and this is probably the biggest one that was the most shocking or surprising for me personally, and that was writing isn't finished when your book is done. That's really when it starts. I was having a conversation recently with a friend of mine who is an author, and I told her that I was really shocked that writing isn't finished when your manuscript is done. I was surprised at the amount of work that comes after. And what I mean by that is, say you finish writing your 50,000 words during NaNoWriMo, and you say, yay, I have a finished manuscript and my book is ready to go. It's ready to be published. That's not true, because then you have to go through a number of processes like beta reading. And we talked about this before too. All of those Facebook groups that I'm a part of, the Beta Reader and Critique Partners group, the Critique Partners group, the Writers, Editors, and Agents group, the PitMad group, all of those groups on Facebook, I joined because I was ready for that next step in my process. And that's sharing your story. That's sharing your story with people who read in your genre, people who are going to give you constructive feedback that you can then look at across multiple people and say, okay, I had 15 people beta read this book, which is actually a small number when you think about it. But say you have 15 people beta read your book. And out of those 15, 11 say, I really enjoyed the book, but this thing didn't make sense. Or this character was really unlikable. Or the plot just wasn't very strong. Or it moved too fast for me. I really would like it to slow down. So if you have 11 out of 15 people saying that to you, then chances are that's a problem. And you want to look into that and say, okay, well, how do I fix that? How do I make sure that my plot is strong? How do I make sure that my characters are likable? How do I make sure they're following a good character arc and they're seeing growth for each character, and not just the main character, but all of your sub-characters too, because they all have to drive that story forward. And how much of this is preference versus how much of it is a problem? Because it's up to you as the writer to decide whether you're going to make those changes or not based on the feedback that you're getting. So you got the feedback and now you've got to look and see what changes need to be made. So then you're going to do some self-editing. And that requires time too. You've got to go in and make sure that you change all the things that need to be changed to make sure that you're not changing any major elements of the story and actually making it stronger and easier to read and better for the reader. Then, after you finish the editing process, you go into querying. And querying is its own beast in itself because it's this specific type of document that you have to write, which is basically a one-page document where you have to reach out to the agent or reach out to the publisher and say, hey, here's this book that I've written. It is like these other books that are out there. And here's what it's about. And then you have to boil down your 50 to 60 plus thousand word manuscript into a few hundred words. And that is giving all the spoilers and giving away your entire plot and your entire storyline in this small amount of space. And then adding in another section where you make it personal to them. And you say that, you know about them. You know that they're looking for this type of story. You know that they enjoy this and you want to connect with those people on a personal level. So you can't have some cookie cutter query letter that you're just copying and pasting and sending to every agent and publisher out there, hoping that somebody's going to bite. Because they want to know that you have put in the work, not just to write your manuscript and edit it, but to find the one who's going to match you. Because agents are the ones that are going to go out and represent you to the publishing companies. They're the ones that know this genre. They're the experts in their area. And if you're not going to take the time to do a little research about them and make it personal when you reach out, then they're not typically going to want to read what you have to write. So that's a whole process in and of itself. And then the third thing that I learned that I felt was pretty important and I wanted to share with you is that writing can be expensive. Writing isn't always cheap. So if this is something that you're thinking about, be aware that a lot of the time you're going to be investing in this if you want it to be a long-term thing that you do. If you really love this and you really want to pursue it, then it's going to take a little bit of money and effort to get it going. Because while you can do it free, you can sit down at your computer, You can write your entire manuscript in Word or Google Docs, and that's going to be just fine. But if you're planning on doing multi-part series and you're planning on having worlds that build on top of worlds, then you really want to invest in organizing that story. Because I can tell you from personal experience how hard it is to have to hunt down something from this notebook over here and that notebook over there and this scrap of paper here when you've written down bits and pieces of somebody's background or descriptions for your characters, and suddenly you're 15 chapters in and you don't remember what color the love interest's eyes are. So you're going to want to invest in writing software, things like Scrivener or Plotter, where they allow you to put everything in a centralized location, and it makes it easier for you to then go back and reference things and make sure that you have consistency, because readers are going to spot inconsistencies. And then something that I recently decided to invest in is Grammarly, because before you get signed on with a publisher, chances are you're going to need editing services. And if you don't want to invest in editing services right away, then a good way to go about it is something like Grammarly. And while Grammarly does have a free program, you don't get all the features that go along with it. So it's not going to tell you things like, you've used "and" in this manuscript 2,337 times. That's kind of a problem. And it'll actually go through and show you where that word shows up and in what context, so that you can have some variety of words going on in your manuscript. And you can change the way something is worded, because if you have an awkward sentence or something that is too long, you have run-on sentences, then it's going to alert you to that. And those are things that a beta reader isn't necessarily going to tell you, because a beta reader is not an editor. A beta reader is someone who's going to go through your manuscript and tell you whether it's a good story overall or not, and why that is. And an editor is somebody that you're going to have to pay for services. They're somebody that's going to go through your manuscript, and depending on how much you want to spend, is going to go as in-depth or not as you want. And that means things like plot inconsistencies, or making sure that your character arcs are there, and doing all of the editorial things. And there are multiple layers of editing services that are available. And it's going to cost you more or less depending on how much you want from them. And more reputable editors charge more. They obviously can. They have a lot more people who want their services. So that's another thing that will cost you if you're not yet signed. And you want the best product that you can get, especially when it's your first book, so that you attract those agents and you attract those publishers. You get them to want your writing. And so you want to present the best possible product you can. And then once you get signed on, you think, okay, well, if you go traditional publishing anyway, then the publisher is going to do a lot of things for you. They're going to do the editing usually, and they're going to do the book cover usually, and things like that. But beforehand, you're not going to have any help with any of that. And advertising, while a traditional publisher is going to do a lot of advertising for you, you're going to be responsible for putting yourself out there too. And that means setting up the social media sites and getting followers, setting up a website. While you can find free websites, a lot of those are going to be paid, because you're going to want your own domain name, and you're going to want to set up your email lists and things like that. And so it can get expensive pretty quickly, because you're spending a little bit of money here and there on a lot of different services. So be aware of that, because if you're thinking about, I really want to write a book, but you don't really want to invest a lot, then find the services that are going to give you those free trials and free subscriptions, and really work to make sure that you're keeping all of that in order and on track. Because I just spent $30 on a new logo for my website and my podcast, because you want consistency across all your platforms. And speaking of which, if you've been following me since the beginning, then you probably noticed that my logo changed recently. And I'd like your feedback on that. So if you want to let me know what you think of my new logo, you can reach out to me and let me know on any of my social media platforms, on Twitter and Facebook at Jayme Phelps Author, on Instagram at Jayme.Phelps_author. And you can listen to this podcast on Spotify, Amazon, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Buzzsprout, and my website, authorjaymephelps.com, where you can subscribe to my newsletter and get updates on my blog, announcements about my upcoming book, and future giveaways. And if you have any questions about anything that I've talked about, or you want to hear more in depth about any of the topics, then you can always send me a message and I will get back to you. In the meantime, I look forward to talking to you again on the next episode of Jayme's Journal.